Professor Alexander L. Baugh, Professor of Church History and Doctrine at BYU, and we're listening to Gospel Tangents.
Violin music by Becca Greenouch.
Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. On October 30th, 1838, 17 Mormon men and boys were killed at Hawn's Mill, Missouri. In our next episode with Dr. Alex Baugh, a church history professor at BYU, we're going to detail some of the gruesome and awful injuries, including mutilation of corpses. It's a really awful story, and so if you're really sensitive to this might be an episode you'll want to skip. But we are going to talk deeply about this, so check out our conversation.
So when these expelled Missouri and Daviess County citizens go over to Livingston County and tell them, we've just been kicked out, they plundered our stuff. Boy, these guys get imbued and said, well, we can do better than that. Like I say, there's this little hamlet down there. And so what I'm trying to tell you is the Hawn's Mill tragedy took place because the Mormons kicked out most of these citizens from Daviess County.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an act of retribution.
Mm-hmm.
They're just not picking on them for one reason after another. I mean, for no reason. They're going, okay, they didn't do anything to us. They were not up there. They were not up there helping remove us. But they're easy pickings, and we'll help you. Well, this is a retribution. This is revenge for kicking us out. We'll kick one of your. We won't kick your group out. We'll
kill you.
Yeah, we're justified in killing you. So to do this now, they have to get a little setup. And so there's communication. They're coming through. And as Mormons are now coming through from the poor camps, we got Kirtland Poor Camp coming. They're coming through here. They're in wagons. They're going right through Livingston County. And they're being held up by some of these Livingston County boys. And they're saying, hey, you passed through our camp. You're a Mormon. You're going through. You go give us your weapon. I mean, they're harassing them. Okay, they actually come over and try to confiscate weapons. If we can get their weapons,
they can't fight back.
They can't fight back. So the Mormons, at times did give them, at other times, they hide them. They would not. So they're harassing them. Now, just right before the massacre, the attack. They came over and said, now you give us your weapons, we'll promise we won't hurt you guys and you don't hurt us. But the idea was to disarm them. And so they kind of tried to make some peace settlement. And this caused so much concern that the Latter-day Saints in that area said, we need to see what Joseph says on this. And who do they send over to meet with Joseph Smith?
Alexander Donovan.
No, they send Hawn.
Oh, Jacob Hawn. Okay.
Yeah, Hawn, you need to go over. We don't know. Are we supposed to stay here and stay in this community? Or are we going to be, these guys are coming over kind of causing problems here, taking our weapons, so on and so forth. Hawn comes over on October 25th. He meets with a militia officer by the name of John Killian. And John Killian says, by all means, you tell those Mormons there, our people, get in here. There's problems up in Daviess County over here, south in Ray County. They need to come in. By all means, come in. And Hawn goes, well, we think we can defend. They think they can defend themselves. We think we can defend ourselves. He says, no. They asked Joseph Smith. He said, by all means, move in. And John D. Lee later says, when Hawn says, we think we can defend ourselves, he says, I thought, that's not the right thing. You need to move in too. Something like that. That's probably not a very good description of what John D. Lee recorded. He remembers Hawn coming in and asking Joseph. Well, what does he do? He goes back and tells the community, Joseph Smith said we could defend ourselves. I mean, Rick, he lied. And I can see why. If you pull up and leave, this is October. What is he doing? His mill is going 24/7. 24/7. This is his livelihood. You pull out,
I'm out of business.
I'm out of business. And he has no association with the church. So he tells them, and we think you can defend yourselves. So that's why they're staying put. Now, years later in Nauvoo, Joseph mentions, I know it's History, Church Volume 5, but He said, had the saints at Hawn's Mill abided by my counsel to come in, none of them would have been killed. I was sitting in my chair in my office down the hall, not this one. I get a call from a guy from St. George, his name, and he said, I'm a descendant of Austin Hammer, and I'm really embarrassed, you know. He was one of those who disobeyed the prophet's encouragement to come in. He didn't obey the prophet. I said, you don't have to feel badly at all. Hawn misreported. I want to say he lied, quite frankly. And they would have come in, but they did not know that Hawn did not tell them the prophet said to come in, and John Killian told them to come in, by all means. So I don't think Joseph knew that. Obviously, you know, no one went and told him and said, you know, the reason we stayed there is because, because
we were lied to.
Yeah, so we don't find this out until later. And Joseph just never knew it. He just never knew that they had not received the word.
Oh, wow.
So I told this Austin Hammer descendant, I said, don't you feel badly. They would have come in. It wasn't their fault. They were not being disobedient.
Right.
Please don't be critical of your ancestor for that. So they decided to put up a guard, kind of to watch, and just to say, you know, and then they said they're going to have peace. They're not going to do anything. And of course, this is October. They have a lot of work to do. The mill's running. This is harvest time. It's a bad time to go anyway, but they're working. And by this time, again, the Livingston and Daviess County men had planned this attack. They're pretty much disarmed, we think. We have some pretty good evidence that we can probably go in there and not have much counteroffensive or counterattack. Meanwhile, again, a number of Latter-day Saints are making their way from Kirtland, this last wave to come before the bad weather sets in. One of them's John Young, Brigham Young's brother. And, of course, then we have the Willard Smith family, Amanda Barnes Smith. She's part of that just straggling contingent of Kirtland Camp people coming through. They're on their last leg. They're 16 miles from far west. They just happen to be there. They were intercepted, and they said, they're kind of harsh with us, blah, blah, blah. But it was afternoon, about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And sure enough, this group of about 200 to 250 men, so they're vastly outnumbered. Now they had, some of the men had come in to guard. Thomas McBride lives about a half mile away. His son was supposed to come in and be just guard duty. He wasn't feeling well, so Thomas McBride comes. He's 62 years old, and he just happened to be there when the attack occurred. But they're on the watch. But they see this. They came from the north, and there's this kind of tree line, so they were hidden for quite some time, and then they emerged out of this line of trees. They had bandanas, blackened faces. Initially, the community thought this was perhaps their own people, our own people from far west, and then they could see they were hostile. And David Evans immediately, they're starting to advance. They come in waves. It's the old Revolutionary War. You got one shot, and then you fall back and get it reload, and they'll have another line come forward. But immediately, about 100 yards out, they're going, "Oh, these guys are hostile." So David Evans, the branch president, yells for peace. Quarters. Oh, we got to talk. What's going on here? And within a few minutes, they're starting to fire. So they had decided before, Rick, that if there was some sort of an attack on the city, not city, it was a very small settlement, that so we've got about 12 families here plus some immigrant Latter-day Saints. So there's a considerable number of people. There's and some right around there, and they've come in for guard duty. So we've got 30 plus men, and but they had thought if there was conflict that perhaps they could use this unfinished blacksmith shop as a garrison, a place of defense. It was a bad choice because unfortunately it was not finished. But they thought, well, this will be good. It wasn't chinked or daubed, so we can. Shoot through the cracks, but that's going to prove fatal. And what ends up happening then is they start attacking, and so the women immediately I'm sure this was prearranged, get out of there. Most of them fled across the river, across the mill race, up the hill, into the woods. They shot at a woman. Her name was Mary Steadwell, and she was shot in the hand. And so they're indiscriminate. They're not just firing at men; they're firing at women and children. But these women are making their way out. She was injured, and she fell behind a log, and her dress was over the log, so they kept pelting the log. And there was 20 bullets right in the log itself, but she only had the hand injured. But they're after the women and children too. So the men, of course, try to find some sort of defense in the blacksmith shop. And I've got the numbers, but about 30 some odd men went in there, and several boys, 4 boys, and with the intent of defending themselves and the community. But as these waves come in, they were slowly able to get under the fire and eventually come right on to the south end is where the door was, and that faced the river. If you've been to Hawn's Mill,
I went there, and
did you go with me?
Well, in June I wanted to go to Hawn's Mill, but they said that the road was muddy.
Yeah.
Stuck,
it's unfortunate.
so I didn't go.
It's hard to get to if the weather's not been good. July and August, it's not a problem. And in September, October, then it's hard in.
I'll have to go back. We'll do a tour together. So
Okay.
We'll have to set that up.
But anyway, the way it was the blacksmith shop was positioned is it could serve as the south door opening was on the south, facing the river. Now that was helpful in one degree, and that was the fact that they were coming from the north, so at least if they were going to get out, they were going to have to go through the south door and then out. And then, of course, they would be exposed. And they did. As they advanced and slowly got closer, the men realized that they better get out of there. And a number of them made their escape, and many of them were wounded in their attempt. And one was even a little boy. His name's Charlie Merrick. He was 9 years old, and he was shot as he was making his way out. And he was wounded, but he died 4 weeks later. So he's not one of the original victims, but he dies 4 weeks later.
Because of it.
Because of the wound, yeah. So, and his dad was Levi Merrick, and he was in the blacksmith shop, and he was killed. Anyway, so they eventually made their way under, so they could actually get right up onto at the blacksmith shop. And then, of course, because this thing was not chinked or daubed, they could just stick their guns in there and fire and probably hit somebody. So, unfortunately, again, they're starting.
So this is essentially kind of a log cabin. So there's
right.
there's
there's
holes
gaps
between the logs.
Yeah. They haven't mudded it, chinked or daubed it, and so on and so forth. This is when, for example, one of the victims, a terrible thing. Again, this is Thomas McBride. He was 62 years old. He was probably the oldest guy there, and he makes his way out and gets hit a couple of times. But he made his way to a house, and he's there at the house. And I'm not sure if he went down in the cellar or what, but he's down there. And this is when Willard Smith, his father, had gone in there along with his brothers Sardius and Alma. He could not, for some reason, go in. He said, I couldn't go in. So he made his way out. They were shooting at him, and he's across the mill race and up the hill. And anyway, he's up there, and he finds McBride. And McBride is just wounded terribly. And McBride says, I've got to have water. I guess if you're wounded, water is just so important. I don't know, but he says, I've got to have water. And he says, I'll try to help you. So he ran back down to the mill to get some, or the river to get some water, and he's just being pelted, but he never got hit. And he took the water back to him and gave it to him. And then by this time, they'd kind of roamed around to try to find some of the Latter-day Saint men. And a guy from Jacob Rogers from Davies County, he's one of the ones they expelled, he finds Thomas McBride. And he says, give me your weapon. And he's thinking, okay, I'm wounded, but he won't hurt me. I'm giving him up my weapon. He gives it to him, and he actually shoots him. And then he takes a corn cutter and cuts off some of his fingers. He mutilates him. I mean, this is a terrible, horrific killing. While he's doing that, and then he dies. And then I'm trying to think of the other fellow's name. Was it one of the Myers? I think it's one of the Myers. He's wounded, and Jacob Rogers comes over to him, and he's going to do the same thing. I'm sure it's a Myers. If I'm wrong, I apologize, but the last name is Myers. And he's going to do the same thing. And one of the Missourians, from either Livingston County or Davies, says, "Don't hurt him anymore. This is a good man. He's milled some." I'm pretty sure it's the Myers then. "He's milled some of my stuff." And so Jacob Rogers did not kill him like he killed Thomas McBride.
It's just horrible.
So it's very, very horrible. Isaac Leaney was pelted, and he made his way and eventually was able to get into the home of Jacob Hawn, and where some of the women had assembled and were praying, and they took care of him. They actually had a floorboard. They were afraid they were going to come to the house and try to find the men and kill them, and the women actually put him under the floorboards. But he was blessed. He was given a priesthood blessing, and he survived from these wounds. I think he had 8 wounds. And what's interesting is years later, Wilford Woodruff talks about this, and I may be off a little bit on the figures, but he was walking in Nauvoo, and Isaac Leaney goes, "Brother Woodruff, do you want to see the clothes I was shot in, I was wearing at the time I was shot at Hawn's Mill?" And he said he went in and he laid out his clothes, and I think he said there were 28 bullet holes.
Oh my God.
So they were probably baggy and things, but his hat and everything, and I think he had 8 wounds, and he recovered. It was unbelievable. But the saddest part, of course, one of the most saddest stories is the incident with Sardius and Alma. So they finally, there was a bunch of men killed in actually dead in the blacksmith shop. One of them, a guy by the name of Champlin, feigned dead. He wasn't even injured, and he pulled some of the bodies around him and feigned like he was dead. And later they discovered him, and they actually held him hostage for 3 days and then let him go. But there was another one that was wounded. But the problem was, and everybody knows, or the sad story about Alma. Well, Sardius was a brother to this Willard, and his father was Willard Smith, Amanda Barnes Smith's husband and sons. And anyway, Sardius had someone put a gun to his ear and just literally blew his brains out. It was just.
He was like 9 years old, is that right?
Well, let's see. I guess Alma was, I think, 9.
Oh, Alma was 9.
I think Sardius was a little older.
Okay.
But anyway, Alma had been shot. They had fired through the gaps, and he had positioned himself behind the bellows, and the guy had shot him, and it ripped off his, shot through his hip. And when Willard comes back, and they'd by this time dispersed, he puts him on his back, comes out of the house, and there's Amanda, the mother, wife of Willard, anyway, comes and says, "Oh, they've killed little Alma." He says, "No, the Alma's okay. Well, he's not okay, but he's shot. But Sardius is dead, and so is father." And the story, of course, is that Amanda was able that night to form a poultice and lie and clean out the wound, form a poultice and some compaction there and some cloth to at least cover the wound. And that little boy laid face down for 3, 4, 5 weeks. And one day, all of a sudden, he was up running around like everybody else. And anyway, It's a miracle that how she kind of reconstructed a hip. I don't know how to say it any other way. She felt like she was divinely directed there. She's my Missouri heroine. She comes out she does remarry. Was it Warren Smith? I think it was Warren Smith. Now I'm not sure on the name, but her second husband was the same name as her first.
Oh, wow.
But anyway, they came out to Utah. The marriage was not good. She eventually divorced him. But she was in the Salt Lake area. Her daughter was up in Richmond, up in Cache Valley, and she went up there to visit her one time, and that's where she died. And no kidding, Rick, every Memorial Day, well, my wife is from Richmond, well, her family's from Richmond, which is about 14 miles north of Logan. And so her grandparents are in the Richmond Cemetery and so on. And when we were up there years ago, I was, we would go up there for Memorial Day, every Memorial Day. I very rarely miss Memorial Day. We go up to my family and her family's, and we go to Richmond and put some flowers on the graves of her ancestors, grandparents, and others in Richmond. And just a hop, skip, and a jump away is the Amanda Barnes Smith grave. So I always stop in Smithfield, and I go buy a rose, and I put a rose on Amanda Barnes Smith's grave every Memorial Day. Now I missed this Memorial Day because I was out of town, but in 2018 was my last one. I put a grave. She's my heroine there, and what's of course the other story is if most Latter-day Saints don't know, but after the attack, they were worried about them coming back, and indeed they did come back. But what's interesting is for 3 weeks they occupied some of the same men who killed the brethren. They came and occupied the community. And she talks about how she wanted, she was just at wit's end. They were using her horse. She needed a horse. Anyway, she just finally went to a cornfield and poured out her heart to God. I can't take this anymore. I've lost my husband, my son, my other son's wounded. I just can't take it anymore. And she said the great hymn, How Firm a Foundation, the last verse. That soul who on Jesus hath leaned for repose, I will not, I cannot. What is it? Something his foes. That soul, though all hell shall endeavor to shake, I'll never, no never, no never forsake. That was her comfort in that time of hardship. But 17 men killed, 2 boys. 17 killed, 2 boys, 15 men. A couple have died later, and then 15 were wounded. 2 of them had legs amputated. The Missourians had 2 minor injuries. There is some evidence, I've got to follow up on a little bit, that one of the men who was attacked the mill from Livingston County or Davies, whatever, was riding away on a horse and somebody shot him thinking it was a Mormon. Now that I've got to verify that one a little bit. So there might have been 1 fatality. But the sad part is, of course, it's late October. We have lost most of our manpower in the community. You've got to bury these bodies. And the next day, they just didn't know what to do, but they had this dry well. And they dug this well trying to find water, and they just didn't have any, so it was a big hole. So the decision was made just to have a massive grave. And they would put the bodies on there was a few men, but they put the bodies on a plank, take them over, and just slide them in. And Amanda Barnes Smith learned about Sardius that he was just laying out there in the sun. And so she and Willard went over, and she said, I covered him with a sheet. I just couldn't stand having him just lay out there. And then the 2 of them, I think somebody helped her or something. I think she slid him he was the last one in that in the grave. So it was a mass grave. So I believe there was 14 buried in that, and then 3 elsewhere. So there's 14 Latter-day Saints buried there. And then she said we covered up the hole, and that's all you could do at that time. And sadly, when the Mormons leave, they were stayed there for several weeks. I mean, they're going to leave in January and February. I think the last to leave that area, like most Latter-day Saints, left in February to go over to Adams County, Quincy. But that next spring, Charles Ross comes on and actually is the next, I'm not sure if he leased the property or bought the property, but Charles Ross comes there, and he said that there was this foul smell from the hole where they had actually buried him. So he tried to mound it over a little better so that it would be better covered. But it's the really, Rick, it's probably the greatest tragedy of the Mormon-Missouri War or conflict. But it is the most the most fatalities due to anti-Mormon activity in the history of the church. It's sad. And again, the sad thing about it is, again, these people had done nothing to the citizens up there in Davies County or Livingston. They were innocent victims. So through all of this, we come at, Joseph's going to be in prison. We talked about that. But, the church came through. And did we lose some? Yeah. We lose people all along that don't remain faithful. But I think those who endured Missouri were pretty faithful people. I can't say how many we lost membership-wise, but I would say less than 200 out of I think there's between, kind of on the low end, probably 5,000 or 6,000 Latter-day Saints in Missouri at the time we were expelled. Maybe as high as 8, but some people give 12 and 15. That's way too high. But we didn't lose that many. We came through. It's probably one of the darkest times in church history.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Dr. Alex Baugh. Our next conversation with Dr. Baugh will be our last, and so it's only going to be available to newsletter subscribers. You just subscribe for free, and I'll send you a free link. So subscribe at gospeltangents.com/newsletter, and I'll send you a free link to the final episode with Dr. Alex Baugh. We're going to talk a little bit about Porter Rockwell and the attempted assassination of Governor Lilburn W. Boggs.
Well, I want to just finish up with one last question, and that would be with Governor Boggs. There was an assassination attempt on his life.
Yeah.
And a lot of people want to pin that on Porter Rockwell.
Yeah, probably was.
Probably was?
Yeah, he was there.
If you'd like to hear the entire interview uncut, please support Gospel Tangents and become a subscriber. For just $5 a month, go to patreon.com/gospeltangents, and you can hear the entire interview. And you can also get transcripts available at either our Amazon website, or if you want to give the money to me and not Amazon, please subscribe on my website at gospeltangents.com, and you can click the yellow subscribe button. Of course, we're also on Facebook, Twitter, and all the other places. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes at tinyurl.com/gospeltangents. And don't forget to click here to subscribe on YouTube, here for a transcript, and over here we've got some more of our great videos. Thanks again for listening.